It was an ordinary Tuesday afternoon in the small town of Eastville. The kind of day where nothing special seemed to happen. The diner on Main Street, Daisy's Diner, was quiet, the hum of old jukebox tunes filling the air. The waitress, a young woman named Lily, was wiping down tables, lost in her thoughts. She had been working long hours and was looking forward to the end of her shift. Just as Lily finished cleaning a booth by the window, she heard the jingle of the door's bell. She glanced up, not expecting anyone unusual, until she saw him. A tall, teenage boy walked in, his posture confident but not arrogant, his casual clothes, jeans, a hoodie, and sneakers, making him blend in with the regulars. But there was something about him. His presence felt different. It wasn't until he glanced around that Lily noticed the security guards. Two tall, imposing men stood just outside the door, scanning the diner. Barron Trump. Lily muttered under her breath. The boy didn't seem to notice the attention, walking up to the counter, as if he were just another teenager looking for a quiet meal. But Lily's heart raced. Could this really be Barron Trump, the son of the former president? Lily tried to steady her breathing as Barron took a seat at the counter. She had seen celebrities in the media before, but seeing one in person, just feet away, was different. It made her nervous, especially when she realized she was the one who would have to take his order. "Good afternoon," Lily said, her voice trembling slightly. "What can I get for you?" Barron smiled softly, a polite, almost shy smile. "I'll have the cheeseburger with fries and a soda, please," he replied calmly. Lily nodded quickly, scribbling down the order on her pad. But as she entered it into the register, a wave of panic hit her. She had accidentally input the wrong order. Instead of the fries, she had mistakenly entered mashed potatoes. "Wait, no," she muttered to herself, frantically trying to correct the error. She was worried he might notice, but she couldn't undo it in time. She could feel her hands shaking as she passed the receipt to the kitchen, unsure of how Barron would react. After all, he was famous. People like him didn't tolerate mistakes. Her heart pounded as she waited for him to speak up. Would he be upset? Lily stood by the counter, her anxiety building with each passing second. Barron, who had been silently looking out the window, suddenly glanced over at her. She caught his eye, and for a moment, she saw a flicker of something, empathy, or perhaps kindness. But before she could process it, her worst fear came true. "Excuse me," Barron said, his voice calm but firm. "I ordered fries, not mashed potatoes." Lily's face turned bright red. She felt her stomach drop as the blood drained from her face. She had made a mistake, and now Barron Trump himself was calling her out on it. She opened her mouth to apologize, but the words wouldn't come. "I'm so sorry. I didn't mean to mess up your order," she stammered, nearly on the verge of tears. "I'll fix it right away." The atmosphere in the diner suddenly shifted. The other customers turned to look, and Lily could feel the weight of their gazes. It felt like everyone was waiting for Barron to lash out, to scold her in front of everyone. But to her surprise, he didn't. Instead, Barron simply nodded. His face softened, and he looked at her with such genuine understanding that it almost took her breath away. "It's okay," Barron said. "Don't worry about it. I'm sure you've got a lot on your plate today." Lily blinked, stunned. She couldn't believe what she was hearing. Barron Trump, this son of a billionaire, this famous teenager, was being kind to her. As she turned to fix the mistake, a strange warmth spread through her chest. She felt the weight of her embarrassment lifting, replaced by something unexpected. Gratitude. Barron's reaction had changed everything. Lily quickly turned around to fix Barron's order, still shaken by the incident. She had never imagined she'd be standing in front of a celebrity, let alone making a mistake in front of him. Her hands trembled as she reached for the potatoes, nearly dropping them as she placed them on the counter. She heard soft murmurs from the other patrons, their eyes not just on Barron, but also on her. She could feel the weight of their judgment. Would they think less of her for making such a small mistake? After all, it wasn't just a regular customer. This was Barron Trump. The world knew him. How could she possibly recover from this? As Lily began preparing the correct order, She could hear the sound of the kitchen staff moving around, the clatter of dishes, and the occasional chuckle from a nearby table. Her mind raced, wondering if Barron would make a big deal out of it. But, to her surprise, Barron's calm voice reached her again. "Hey, don't rush," he said, looking at her with a comforting smile. "I'm not in a hurry. Just take your time." Lily paused. His words struck her like a calming wave. Barron wasn't upset. He wasn't angry. He was understanding. She had expected arrogance, but instead, she found humility. As Lily placed the correct order in front of Barron, she noticed how different he was compared to what she had expected. Instead of demanding or getting frustrated, he smiled at her with a warmth that disarmed her completely. His eyes seemed to convey an understanding of the pressure she was under, the anxiety she felt. "Thank you so much," she said, barely able to look up at him. "I'm really sorry for the mix-up." Barron smiled, the kindness in his face making Lily feel a bit more at ease. "It's really okay," he said, his voice gentle. "Everyone makes mistakes. It's how we handle them that matters." Lily's heart softened. She had expected Barron to react harshly, but instead, he was teaching her something she hadn't expected, a powerful lesson in humility. She felt a strange warmth spread through her chest, as if the weight she had been carrying had lifted. It wasn't just the food that mattered to Barron, it was the way he made her feel. And in that moment, Lily realized that the smallest acts of kindness could make the biggest difference in someone's life. As Lily continued her shift, she couldn't help but notice how the energy in the diner had shifted. The regular customers who had witnessed the interaction between her and Barron were no longer just going about their meals. They were watching, taking in the quiet yet powerful exchange. A couple sitting near the window whispered to each other, their faces softened with admiration. The old man at the counter, who usually kept to himself, nodded approvingly. Even the waitstaff, who had seen their fair share of demanding customers, seemed to be affected by Barron's calm and kind demeanor. It was as though Barron had unknowingly changed the mood of the entire diner. The tension that had filled the room moments before had vanished, replaced by something entirely different: respect. People weren't just admiring Barron because of who he was, they were beginning to understand the importance of humility and kindness. In a world where people were often quick to judge and slow to forgive, Barron had set an example for all of them. Lily couldn't believe it. She had come to work feeling defeated, but now, thanks to Barron's unexpected kindness, she felt inspired. His actions had shown her the power of a simple smile, a gentle word, and the impact they could have on someone's life. As the minutes passed, Lily tried to push the awkwardness from her mind. She focused on her other tables, but it was impossible not to think about Barron. Her hands were still shaking slightly from the embarrassment. She couldn't stop replaying the moment over and over in her head. The other customers, too, had started to whisper. A group of teenagers in the corner booth snickered as they watched Lily. Lily tried to pretend she didn't notice, but it was impossible. She could feel their eyes on her, wondering if Barron would react more harshly. Then, unexpectedly, Barron's voice broke through the noise, calm and soft. "It's really fine," he said again, addressing Lily directly from across the counter. The moment was like a wave crashing over her. His voice, his expression, the calmness in his demeanor, it was more than she could bear. She hadn't realized how badly she needed kindness until she received it. Her shoulders relaxed, the tension slowly beginning to melt away. But Barron's presence had caused more than just an internal change in Lily. It was like he had sparked something in the entire diner. No one had expected this type of grace, especially from someone so young, and they were beginning to take note. As Lily began to regain her composure, she couldn't help but notice the people around her. A man sitting at the counter, who had been lost in his own world moments before, now stared at Barron with respect. The elderly couple in the corner booth, once focused on their meal, were now exchanging glances, both touched by Barron's calm nature. Lily felt a stirring in her heart. Barron hadn't just calmed her anxiety. He had affected everyone. It was a ripple effect. His quiet humility had spread through the diner, almost like a silent lesson on how to treat one another. She took a deep breath and found herself feeling different. Instead of running away from the mistake, she was standing tall. Maybe, just maybe, she could handle this job after all. Barron's actions had unknowingly given her strength. It was then that Lily realized something. What had started as an embarrassing moment had turned into something far greater. It was a lesson about kindness, something that didn't require loud gestures or showy actions. It was about simply treating others with respect. Just as Lily was about to turn to the next table, Barron stood up. His guards, who had been standing near the door, moved slightly, always keeping a close eye on him. But Barron wasn't in any rush to leave. He looked over at Lily, and for a moment, it felt like time had stopped. He approached the counter slowly, his eyes locking with hers. "I just wanted to say something," Barron began, his voice quiet but steady. "You did a good job, and I know it's hard sometimes, especially when people expect a lot from you." He paused, looking around the diner at the other customers who were now watching him. "But you handled it really well. Keep going. Don't let a mistake stop you from doing your best." Lily was taken aback. His words, simple as they were, hit her like a ton of bricks. She had expected him to leave, maybe with an eye roll or a dismissive comment, but instead, Barron had just praised her, a complete stranger. And then, without any more words, he left, his guards following closely behind him. The entire diner fell into an eerie silence. No one moved for a few moments. What had just happened? Lily stood there, staring after Barron, tears beginning to well in her eyes. This was not the response she had imagined. The feeling of being seen, of being understood, was overwhelming. It had been a small moment, but to her, it felt like the most significant one of her life. Lily stood frozen behind the counter, her heart still racing from Barron's words. The diner felt like a different place now. The once noisy hum of voices had quieted, and for a long moment, she could hear nothing but the beat of her own heart. Barron Trump had just given her the most unexpected gift, kindness, wrapped in humility. She looked around, noticing the stunned faces of the other diners. They, too, seemed caught in the quiet aftershock of Barron's actions. It wasn't just his words that had affected them. It was his simple, genuine demeanor, his lack of entitlement. For a moment, it was as if the whole diner had learned something important, something that no one had been willing to admit before, that kindness could make the world feel like a better place. The elderly man, who had been sitting alone at the counter, now looked up from his coffee. His eyes softened, and he gave a small, approving nod. The teenagers who had been laughing at the beginning were now whispering quietly to one another, their expressions more thoughtful than before. Lily couldn't help but feel a wave of gratitude wash over her. Barron had turned a day filled with anxiety into one of reflection and hope. She had made a mistake, yes, but it had led to something far more meaningful. The atmosphere in the diner had shifted, and Lily couldn't ignore the change in the air. The feeling of tension had completely dissipated. It wasn't just because Barron had been understanding. It was because of the lesson his actions had taught everyone in the room. Lily was no longer the nervous cashier who had messed up Barron's order. She was someone who had experienced the power of compassion firsthand, someone who now understood that we are all human, and mistakes are part of life. But it was how we responded to those mistakes that mattered most. A woman sitting near the door, who had been silently watching the entire interaction, now spoke up. "You know," she said, her voice gentle but strong, "the world could use more people like that. People who aren't afraid to show a little kindness, even when they don't have to." Lily smiled, touched by the woman's words. She wasn't the only one who had been impacted. The entire diner had witnessed something rare, a simple act of kindness that made everything else seem less important. No one seemed to mind anymore that the mistake had been made. It was Barron's response that had changed everything. As the last of Barron's entourage stepped out of the diner, Lily watched as the young man slowly walked towards the door. His guards flanked him, but Barron's demeanor remained humble and unassuming. For all his fame, his wealth, and the power that came with his last name, he carried himself like any other teenager, quiet, thoughtful, and kind. Lily felt a deep sense of wonder as she watched him leave. He wasn't the type of person she had expected. She had imagined Barron Trump to be distant, maybe even unapproachable, but what she had just witnessed had completely shattered those assumptions. He wasn't just another celebrity. He was a young man who seemed to understand the world on a deeper level than most. Lily turned to the window as Barron's car pulled away, flanked by his guards, heading down the quiet street. Her mind raced. How had one simple interaction changed so much for her? It felt as if Barron's brief presence had illuminated her world, making her realize that even small moments could hold so much meaning. She wasn't just a cashier in a diner anymore. She was a witness to a life lesson that she would never forget. As the door swung open, a cool breeze filled the diner, signaling the arrival of Barron's bodyguards. The patrons turned their heads, not out of shock, but with a growing sense of wonder. Barron Trump, son of a former president, had just walked into the local diner, blending in with a nonchalant ease that defied his celebrity status. Lily couldn't believe her eyes. He looked like any other teenager, jeans, a simple hoodie, and his tousled hair falling over his forehead. No one would have guessed that this was the son of one of the world's most famous figures. He didn't carry himself like a star. He carried himself like someone you might see walking into any other diner. As Barron moved toward the counter, Lily felt a knot form in her stomach. The mistake she'd made earlier still haunted her thoughts. She tried to steady her breathing, but the presence of the bodyguards, the whispers from the other customers, it all seemed to amplify her anxiety. But when Barron ordered, he did so calmly, just like any other customer. He wasn't demanding, and his tone was polite. There was no arrogance, no sense of superiority. In that moment, Lily realized something crucial. He was just a teenager, and like anyone else, he appreciated kindness and respect. Lily's fingers brushed over the menu, trying to steady her nerves. Barron sat down at a booth near the window, his bodyguards stationed at a discreet distance. She didn't know why, but something about him made her feel even more nervous than usual. She hurriedly scribbled his order and made her way to the kitchen, but her mind was clouded with thoughts of her previous mistake. As she handed over the order to the cook, her thoughts drifted back to Barron, his quiet demeanor, his youthful face. The weight of the mistake she'd made earlier weighed heavily on her. The order was quickly prepared and brought out to Barron, but as she placed it on the table, something fell off. The fries were wrong. He had asked for no salt, but the plate was covered in seasoning. Lily's heart sank. She could feel the familiar heat rising in her cheeks. What if Barron got upset? What if he complained? She had seen how people treated celebrities, and sometimes it wasn't pretty. But what if she failed him, too? Lily stood frozen in place, watching Barron stare down at the plate, his expression unreadable. For a long moment, everything felt still, silent. The other diners looked on, a quiet anticipation hanging in the air. It felt as though the weight of the world had shifted onto her shoulders. But then, Barron raised his eyes to meet hers, and for a split second, Lily feared he might get upset. To her surprise, Barron smiled. It wasn't the kind of smile she had expected from a celebrity. There was no sense of entitlement in his expression, no impatience. It was simply kind. "Hey, it's okay," Barron said softly, motioning to the fries. "I think there's just a little mistake. Could you get me the right ones when you get a chance?" "No big deal." Lily felt her breath catch in her throat. He wasn't angry. He wasn't annoyed. In fact, he seemed to be more concerned about her being upset than the mistake itself. His simple words, "no big deal," echoed in her mind. His understanding, his humility, was so unexpected. In a world where people demanded perfection, Barron's kindness was a rare and beautiful thing. Lily blinked back tears, overwhelmed by how gracious he had been. Lily stood at the counter, staring at Barron as he calmly dug into his fries. The weight of her mistake still lingered, but his reaction had been unlike anything she'd ever expected. He hadn't yelled. He hadn't complained. Instead, he treated her with such kindness that it left her speechless. The other diners, who had once watched with curiosity and amusement, now exchanged looks of admiration. It wasn't just Barron's response that had stunned them. It was the way he had made the entire situation feel, human. He hadn't acted like a celebrity, but like a young man who understood the value of empathy and respect. Lily glanced at her coworkers, who were all quietly watching from the back. They, too, were taken aback by Barron's composure. There had been no expectation for him to be so humble. The moment had shifted the energy in the diner. For the first time, Lily realized how rare it was to encounter such genuine kindness. The rest of the meal passed in quiet reflection. People were no longer focused on Barron's celebrity or his wealth. They were focused on the lesson he had unknowingly taught them, that kindness is far more valuable than status. As the meal came to an end, Barron finished his drink and stood up, motioning to his guards. They slowly made their way toward the door, but Barron turned around one last time to look at Lily. "You've got this," he said, his voice calm but firm. "Don't let a little mistake make you doubt yourself." Lily's heart swelled with emotion. She had expected him to leave without a word, without any recognition of her nervousness. Instead, he had taken a moment, just a single moment, to remind her that everyone makes mistakes. His words resonated deeply with her, reminding her that she didn't have to be perfect to deserve kindness. His humility had shattered her previous perceptions about the way famous people treated others. It was an awakening for Lily. There was more to life than being afraid of judgment. As Barron exited the diner, his guards flanking him, Lily stood frozen in place. She could feel the weight of his words, and for the first time in a long while, she felt hope. The door closed behind Barron, and silence enveloped the diner. For a moment, it felt like time had stopped. No one moved, no one spoke. They were all lost in the moment, in the power of Barron's unexpected act of grace. Lily blinked back tears. She could feel the change within her, and she wasn't the only one. The other patrons were quietly talking amongst themselves, each of them reflecting on what had just happened. It was a rare moment of clarity, a brief encounter that had touched everyone in the room. Lily took a deep breath and smiled. Barron Trump, someone she had expected to be distant and unreachable, had just shown her the true meaning of kindness. He had turned a small mistake into a life-changing moment, one that she would never forget. As she cleared the counter, she glanced at the door once more, thinking of Barron and the lesson he had left behind. It wasn't about who you were, how much money you had, or your status. It was about how you treated others, especially when no one was watching.